Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Maintaining Your Balance and Focusing on Your Support System. My name is Allison Friedman, and I'm with OJJDP's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. As your technical host, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of the Adobe Connect webinar platform and provide a few announcements to keep in mind. For those wishing to download a copy of the PowerPoint slides and webinar-related handouts, you may do so by locating the Handouts pod directly above the chat area. Click on the name of the file and then click the Download button. At the end of today's webinar, there will be a Q&A session where the presenter will address some of the questions posed during the presentation. Please type your questions into the chat box as they arise. For those of you participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a moment and help us count. Go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you are viewing alone, there is no need to type anything into the chat pod at this time. Following today's webinar, attendees will be sent a certificate of attendance. This certificate is sent approximately 1 hour following the conclusion of the event and is sent via an Adobe Connect thank you email. Please keep an eye on your email for your certificate. Finally, this event will be archived in approximately 3 weeks on OJJDP's online university at www.ojjdpou.org, where you can also find additional resources and view past webinars. Again, thank you for joining us today. I will now turn it over to Beth Medina and Elizabeth Toe from Shift to begin today's webinar.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. I just want to tell you a little bit about Shift Wellness and about the Innocent Justice Foundation. I am the CEO and the Shift Program Manager. I'm the CEO for the Innocent Justice Foundation, and we oversee as a training and technical assistance provider, the Shift Wellness Program, which started under OJJDP through a grant, and we've been doing the training since 2009. So I'm really glad to be here to present some of the topics we discussed in our trainings for ICAC professionals, and I look forward to sharing this with you.
Hi, everybody. This is Elizabeth Tao, and I just want to echo what Beth says. Thanks so much for joining us. I really want to give a shout-out to not only the law enforcement people that are on and joined, but the family members and support group families or friends that are with us as well. We do these trainings all over the United States. This is kind of new for us to do it through technology, so we would love to hear your guys' feedback. If you're interested in having more trainings at all, you can let us know. You can always go to our website, and then I'm sure our contact information will be at the end as well. And now we're going to go ahead and turn it over to the two presenters for the day. That is Anthony and Carol, and we'll have them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Carol Brusca. I am half of the team presenting today. I am the mental health provider for the New Mexico Attorney General's Office, ICAC, and Anthony and I work closely together to support his ICAC as well as the families involved. So we love the work that we do. Our families have shown that they have experienced this and loved it, and we're hoping that you will get something out of it today too. And here's Anthony.
Hi, my name is Anthony Mays. I'm the commander of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force and Human Trafficking Task Force for the Office of the New Mexico Attorney General. I've been the commander for about 10 years now. I've been in law enforcement for over 30, and I'm really excited about sharing this program with you. I implemented the program years ago in my agency. We've worked with families within our agency, and we've seen some great successes. We're excited to share these successes with you.
So the objectives that we would like to go over today, we would like to introduce Shift and let everybody know what Shift is. We're hoping that many of the law enforcement involved in this webinar today have experienced a Shift class, but if not, then you'll get to find out exactly what it is, and then hopefully you could request a Shift fast for your ICAC. We will also be talking about what vicarious trauma is, because many people have not heard of that term or have heard of it and are not aware of what it is. We'll talk about reasons for support training, why we're doing this training today, and how we've seen that it can be beneficial. We want to do an overview of awareness, and we're going to talk about tools and techniques for wellness. So here we go. So what we want to talk to you about first is what SHIFT is and what SHIFT isn't. SHIFT is education. SHIFT is awareness. It's preventative, and it's believing that people are already healthy. So what we're talking about today is not treatment and counseling, fitness for duty, and screening. SHIFT and the SHIFT trainings are all about understanding that you already have wellness and then making sure that you can incorporate that in your day-to-day life at work and at home.
And what SHIFT isn't, and this is something that comes up quite a bit when I talk to my affiliates throughout the state, and we actually discuss this throughout the country as well when we do these presentations. It's not treatment and counseling, and it's not fitness for duty. And that question always comes up and is always a concern with law enforcement, is this fitness for duty? So if I express that I'm having issues or some of the images that I'm seeing or some of the things that I'm dealing with on a daily basis, am I going to lose my job? No, this isn't about fitness for duty. SHIFT is to make you healthy, and it's not about screening either, which is definitely a big concern. That was one of the concerns I received from some of my federal partners who were afraid that it would be a screening tool, and again, they weren't feeling comfortable enough to actually talk to someone. So SHIFT is definitely not that.
Okay. So what does the audience think vicarious trauma is? If you are not aware of this term or haven't heard it before, vicarious trauma is what happens to you when you witness someone else's trauma. And this can be the trauma that the law enforcement officers experience every day, or it can be something like witnessing a car accident. But when you witness the trauma of someone else, it impacts every part of you. So you're impacted physically, psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. This can occur if you are not able to then figure out how to get rid of the stress that's involved when you witness a trauma for someone else. So today we would like to help you by teaching you tools and techniques that you can use so that you are not vicariously traumatized. And now we'd like to show a video, a SHIFT video.
As a human race, we are set up to protect our own children. We are set up, that is something deep inside us that says we will protect our own children. So imagine the impact on the officer who sat watching another adult deliberately inflict pain and torture on a child, especially if that officer has children themselves.
I wish someone would have told me, warned me about how horrific some of the images and movies that we were going to see are.
I don't think there's a way to describe the reaction that you have when you first view an image of a child being abused. It burns your soul.
It's never possible for you to forget them once you've seen them. I had a very physical reaction, like repulsed, like that, like, oh my gosh, sort of reaction, like, I can't even believe that I'm seeing this.
You literally would kind of hold your hands up and just close your eyes and push the button to open that image.
When I was younger and I first got started and the pictures were the age of my daughter, I thought those were the worst. And then I was in it a little bit longer, and I saw pictures the age of my son, and I thought those were the worst. Then I saw pictures of infants being sexually molested, and I thought, it can't get worse than this. Yet every day I go to work, I'm always surprised that, yes, there's an image that seems to be worse than the one I saw the day before.
Let's be honest, there's no way we should be expecting officers to look at these kind of things without it having an impact. It isn't unusual for what comes through a child's eyes to be the thing that impacts you. And so often these eyes, they're asking, they're begging you to help them. And these officers can't because they can't find them.
There aren't enough of us.
The examiners are in short supply. There's a backlog anywhere from 6 to 12 months with casework that's waiting to be analyzed.
Yeah, I would love it if we were 6 months behind, because we're easily 12 to 14 months behind.
You know, I have 150,000 pictures left on this particular part of this particular exam. How am I going to get through this today?
You treat every message that comes into you as very critically important because you could be physically stopping a child from being sexually assaulted. You feel that it's so important that you don't want to stop the casework.
The workload is phenomenal, and it increases exponentially every month and every year. We never can catch up. There's never a light at the end of the tunnel.
Sometimes I do a pretty bad job of balancing work and home life because of the overwhelming amount of work that I have.
For the officers who are looking at this day in and day out, they will, at least now and again, they will take this home. And that will then impact on their friends and their family.
Most of my employees have children. So, and as parents, we know when our kids are hurting. So, you know, to see
Okay, so what we're going to talk about now is your brain on stress. This picture very graphically explains what your brain is like on stress. We tend to think of stress as like an immediate problem. So maybe we got into a fight with our spouse, or maybe we were stuck in traffic, something like that. But that's short-term stress. Over time, if we don't handle our stress, there are long-term effects of stress. Over time, what happens is we have an elevated level of cortisol, which is the hormone that's produced when we feel stress, and this can affect our long-term physical, mental, and emotional health. There's a link between chronic stress and the potential for mental health conditions, like post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, and other mood disorders. But what kind of changes, both fleeting and lasting, are actually taking place in the brain when we experience a stressful event? There are 4 ways that stress changes your brain. Stress could trigger a chemical change that makes you irritable. Many of us know that we're not pleasant to be around when we're stressed out. We may get irritable and grumpy. Under pressure, many people get distracted and forgetful, and this could be a sign of the destructive effects of stress in the brain. French researchers discovered an enzyme, when triggered by stress, that attacks a molecule in the hippocampus, which is responsible for regulating synapses. When the synapses are modified, fewer neural connections are able to be made in this area. So the effects lead to subjects to lose their sociability, avoid interactions with others, and have impaired memory or understanding. So chronic stress can also shrink your brain. Stressful life events could harm your brain's memory and learning capacity. Chronic stress and/or depression can contribute to loss of volume in the brain's medial frontal cortex, which is associated with emotional and cognitive impairment. Researchers found that this is particularly true of people with a genetic marker that can disrupt the formation of synaptic connections between the brain cells. So a study in 2008 showed that even mice for short-term stress could lead to communication problems among brain cells in regions associated with memory and learning. Another thing that can happen with long-term stress is that it can kill brain cells. So as we learn new information, we constantly generate new neurons in the hippocampus. But ongoing stress can halt the production of new neurons and may affect the speed of connections between the hippocampal cells. Also, the stress can disrupt memory by triggering the brain's threat response. So when cortisol hampers the activity of the hippocampus, when it's produced, it increases the size and the activity of the amygdala. the brain's main center for emotional responses and motivation. The amygdala is responsible for fear processing, threat perception, and fight or flight response. Increased activity means we're in a state of reacting to perceived threat, which can have the effect of restructuring our ability to make new information. So all of these things let us know how bad stress is for us, and it helps us to recognize that every single time we experience stress, it's having a negative effect. We would like to show you how you can mitigate that effect by using tools and techniques.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some multi-level challenges. So, of course, some of the challenges that we experience are the work challenges, the long hours. Across the country, we see that law enforcement is expected to work longer hours, definitely in more cases, the shortage of manpower, inability to share all that happens. Difficult sometimes because maybe they're being isolated and unable to share exactly what's going on, or they're all experiencing the same events, and it's difficult to talk to someone outside the squad.
And there's challenges at home as well. Prioritizing home life. We know how busy law enforcement is, and if someone is in law enforcement, there's a great likelihood that they're going to be working overtime or maybe evenings and weekends. And when that happens, it's hard to make sure that you prioritize your family first. Many times this happens and we think, well, this week I'm working late, but next week I'll take some time off. And then that next week never comes. Once again, the following week you're busy and you've shortchanged yourself and your family. There's the ability to be present for your family, children, and spouse and friends. That's also a challenge. When you are strapped with work to do, when you're stressed out and mentally exhausted, it's very difficult to be present for your family and your children. And one of the things that we'd like you to understand today is that being present for your family, children, spouse, and friends is something that actually can give you some more energy. It's a great stress reducer. It's a tool that we would like you to add to the toolbox. And for the families, we would like you to understand that when you can be there for your law enforcement member, they're going to get the benefits of you being in their life. Another challenge is social interaction. It's harder for many people who are working ICAT cases to feel comfortable in a social situation if somebody asks them what they do. There's a tendency for them to feel like if I tell them, they're going to withdraw, because many of the law enforcement officers that I've worked with, and Anthony has spoken about this as well, the minute you tell somebody what your job is, then they withdraw and they're not really interested and it feels very awkward. So it's less likely that you will interact with people. Another thing that I hear from law enforcement officers is that, you know, after spending their day looking at really horrific images or maybe hearing horrific information, it's hard to be empathic for somebody else who said, well, I was running late today and I was stuck in traffic. That level of empathy just isn't there because it feels like other people's problems are very minute with respect to the problems that they're experiencing on a daily basis. There's a benefit for families to understand what their law enforcement spouse or family member is experiencing. One of the things that's a benefit is it's a better position to support family and friends. So if you as a family member are on this webinar today, the information that we're passing along is going to be helpful to you so that because you will now have an understanding of what your law enforcement family member, partner, spouse is experiencing. And with that understanding, you can have a better level of compassion, and you can also open up the lines of communication. It's the ability to discuss and understand changes in behavior that might occur related to the work. So for instance, if you now as a family member understand what your spouse is experiencing, it will allow you to understand why sometimes when they come home at night, they don't want to talk. They withdraw. They don't open up to you. And many of the families that I've spoken with, what they think is that when their spouse comes home very quiet, very reserved, the first thing is, what did I do wrong as a family member? What did I do to upset my spouse? When this occurs, then there's a tendency for them, the spouse or family member, to get defensive, which then can easily start an argument. So the training today is going to be a tool for you to open up those lines of communication. And it's an increased comfort in knowing and discussing your concerns. So after the spouse spouses or family members have experienced this webinar, they will then have the language to understand and speak to their law enforcement spouse of what's going on. And again, it's a common ground of understanding. So from the mental health provider perspective, this is what family members have told me. And I know from Anthony's perspective, he's going to talk a little bit about what it was like for him to have a family that understands what he does.
So understanding the support of your family is very important, especially when you have that long day. And it's difficult for law enforcement to admit that. Being in law enforcement for over 30 years, many times I come home and I've had a long day and we've had some horrific cases, and I walk in the door and my family really doesn't understand what I'm going through, and they think just turning that off, leaving work at work and walking in the door, that it's something that should be done. But sometimes understanding what we're going through and how difficult it can be and working with that person really makes a big difference.
So right now we have a group exercise. If you could all please write in what you feel are your signs of stress. So we're looking at the answers right now, and many of the answers that we're seeing are very, very common across the nation. There's a lot of physical things such as pain, physical stress. We're seeing some body tension. Those, many times the pain, like the shoulder tension, the other tension that you're feeling, that relates to the cortisol in your system when you're feeling fight, flight, or freeze. So when your brain thinks that you are potentially in a situation where your life is at risk, your body responds by making you prepared for that. Many times what happens if you are feeling like you were in fight mode, you'll feel pain in your upper body, you'll feel headaches, you'll feel tension in your back, you'll feel some other physical symptoms. Then I'm seeing a lot of things here to talk about sleep and sleep patterns. That's very, very common as well. When we have a lot of cortisol in our body and when we haven't been able to talk about what's going on with us, then our brain just perseverates on that and it stays in our head. And then the time that it really comes out is when we're trying to sleep. So it's very common to have sleep issues. It's very common to have poor sleep patterns. And typically we find many times with law enforcement that poor sleep patterns are kind of the norm. These things can also happen to the family member, particularly if you don't have a sense of what's going on with your law enforcement loved one. It could happen that you're having sleep issues, worried about what's going on for them, worried about what they're experiencing. We see some no motivation to do chores or fatigue, another common one. It's the cortisol in your system weighs you down, and when your system is weighed down from cortisol, you have lack of motivation, you have all sorts of other physical issues as well. So we appreciate everybody typing these things in, and we're going to go on, and you will see that many of the things that you talked about here are things that we have in our slides as well. So what we'd like to talk about right now is what does normal stress look like? When you have normal stress, there can be physical reactions such as aches and pains or changes in sleep patterns. and edginess and reactive. So when you have normal stress, what happens is you respond to the stress, and then there's a reaction to that. So you could have aches and pains because you've got cortisol in your body that hasn't been released, changes in your patterns in sleep because you've got cases on your mind that you can't get rid of, or because you have your family members on your mind. Sex can often changes in sex patterns. That can be for multiple reasons. Maybe because you're too stressed to think about having sex. Maybe because when you think about sex, you're thinking about ICAC cases, which is going to deter you from wanting to have sex. And there's also appetite changes. People report to me there's either a tendency to want to eat more or then not eat at all. It's one or the other. All of these things relate to the fight, flight, or freeze mode and the cortisol in your system, and then not being able to release that. And the edginess and reactivity. That happens because if you're overtired because you haven't gotten sleep, if you are stressed out because you feel like there's thousands of cases left and you haven't been able to get to them, if you feel like as a family member or as law enforcement that whatever you say isn't, is starting a fight, there's no communication going on, obviously you're going to feel some edginess and reactivity. So coping with these things, what can you do to reset your physical stress reaction? You want to increase the endorphins, and that is pretty simple. It's not anywhere near as difficult as you would imagine. One of the ways to increase endorphins is do things that makes you feel good. So any kind of exercise is going to really help that. One of the things that we recommend really is for families to exercise together. So if you have your law enforcement and you've got your family supports and everybody goes out for a walk, it's a wonderful time for you to bond together as a family, and it's also a wonderful time to get those endorphins out of your body, get that cortisol moving out, get the positive hormones moving in, and make you feel better. This, movement can help also by allowing you a single focus. So if you're out, say, running 5 miles, you're going to be pretty focused on just that 5 miles. You're going to be paying attention to making sure that your foot is sure on the ground, to make sure that you're not running out in front of a car, making sure that you have full focus on your run. That's going to help to reset your physical reaction. This will also improve your mood because as the endorphins come in, your mood will improve and depression will decrease. It will aid in your sleep because, again, as your endorphins come in and you are feeling, you're doing some exercise and feeling more relaxed, obviously sleep is going to be more easy to achieve. You want to start where you are. So maybe some of you are already very physically active and you have a good routine already, but maybe some of you don't. This isn't a time for us to tell you to be judgmental about what you're doing. It's a time for us to offer you some suggestions on what you can do and see how you can feel better in the long run. And having a buddy plan. So like I said previously, if you can get the family to do this together, it's wonderful bonding time. It's a great way for you to be a role model as a parent, that a family that exercises together is more healthy. And then arm yourself with healthy snacks. When you're under a lot of stress, we have a tendency to reach for foods that are high in carbohydrates and high in fat, when what our body really needs is snacks that are very lean and very healthy. So you want something like lean proteins, fruits and vegetables, and lots of water. Water's going to help you because when you are drinking water, it will help flush the cortisol and the toxins out of your body to help you start with a clean slate. So what does normal stress look like with respect to mental reactions? There's going to be some of these, again, we saw on the answers that people were talking about. Confusion and forgetfulness. When your brain is saturated with cortisol, it's much more difficult for you to think clearly. So that's going to lead to confusion, forgetfulness, and inability to make decisions. So when you add that on top of the cortisol, when you add the ongoing stress, and then the frustration about being confused or the frustration about inability to make decisions, it just compounds everything. There's a tendency to blame other people because we're feeling on edge. We're feeling like things aren't working out for us and we don't know how to make a change. So we blame other people because we can't see that things necessarily might be our issue or they might be related to what we're doing. There's a change of alertness. There's a tendency to not be as alert as we normally are. When we're bogged down with cortisol, when our body is tired, when we are feeling overstressed, when we're feeling overwhelmed, when we know that there's 1,000 more cases out there that we need to deal with, it's going to change our ability to be alert. And we're going to have a loss of sense of time. That can happen as well. All of these things that we're talking about, the mental reactions, it doesn't necessarily occur to everyone, and it doesn't necessarily occur in the exact same way that I've mentioned, but these might be a common theme that you see in your life or in the life of your spouse. We have a list on the website of signs and symptoms that you can certainly look for. I think at the end we've got our contact information as well as the SHIFT website. So if you go on that website, there's some really great resources there. There's going to be resources on resiliency tips. There's resources on signs and symptoms. There's resources for families. So please, by the end of this or after the end of this training, please take a look at our website because there's great information there that can help you start to make a change today. Mental reactions. So what can we do to reset our mental stress reaction? That's the beauty of this. Even though you will have to deal with the stress on a daily basis, there are definitely things that you can do. One of the things is mindfulness, and we hear that term quite a bit these days, but what we are talking about when we talk about mindfulness is really trying to be present in the moment. So when we're talking about that, when you're having a conversation with someone, don't listen to what they say so you can be prepared to talk, to reply to them. Listen to what they say without any other thoughts in your mind. When we're talking about mindfulness, we're talking about with every activity that you do, be fully present. Try to focus on just that activity. The reason that this is useful to reset our mental stress reaction is because when we're focused on one thing, then the other negative thoughts don't creep in. When and meditation is another great skill. There are lots and lots of apps out there that can help you with meditation if you're not sure about that. And we probably have some suggestions on what to on apps as well if you go on our website. Deep breathing, very, very simple, can be done at any point. All you need to do is just 10 deep breaths in and out, and that's going to slow your heart rate down. It's going to get some oxygen to your brain, which will allow you to think more clearly. Sense, when you're smelling different positive scents, it can make you remember a good experience. It can help calm you down. It can help slow your breathing. And a body scan is another really quick, simple tool you can use. All you do is you pay attention to what's going on in your body. So, am I feeling stress in my head? Am I feeling stress in my fingers? Am I feeling stress in my neck and shoulders? Scan your body for where you're feeling stress, and then see how you can get rid of that by some gentle movements, by doing some stretching. Plan for tomorrow. When you have the ability to plan an event, it's going to help decrease your stress. When you have a sense of control over your day, over your life, that's going to decrease your stress as well. Any of these things can be done as a family. So for instance, maybe you go for a walk and you make a point of literally smelling the roses. And that's something that you can do as a family, and it can, again, show your children the importance of wellness and taking care of themselves. So behavioral reactions that you might experience. Changes in your normal activities. And again, these are things that you as a law enforcement officer can see, but your family might see in you as well. And then you, as a family member, might experience these because your level of stress has gone up as a result of you having a family member in law enforcement. There might be changes in normal activities. So maybe it used to be that you would want to go spend time on a Thursday night bowling with your friends. Or maybe you used to be more involved in your children's activities. Maybe you and your spouse used to have date night. When those things change, that's an indicator that things need to be adjusted. It's not saying that you're bad or you're wrong. It's just saying pay attention to this so you know you need to make some changes. Change in communication is another common behavioral reaction. So maybe you've shut down. Maybe your spouse has shut down. This is the circumstance that's very, very common. I hear this from our ICAC folks and their families quite a bit. When we get stressed out, one of the first things we either do is lash out or shut down. And shutting down and not talking about things is very common, particularly when you don't want to traumatize your family member. So you go home at night and you're feeling devastated, you're feeling traumatized, but the last thing that you want to do is you want to traumatize your family. Substance abuse is another common thing that we see, being very suspicious. So, you know, you're suspicious of neighbors because you are worried that they might be someone who is going to molest children. You think your changes in your situational reaction changes as well. So this could be you used to respond one way and now you respond a different way. Anthony can tell a story about when he and his son were in a hobby store.
Yeah, so we become very hypervigilant and, of course, suspicious of individuals, as Carol mentioned. I was at the Hobby Lobby with my son trying to pick out a plastic model, and I heard a child start crying, and the cry triggered a reaction from me from a video that I had witnessed or that I was viewing as part of evidence in a case, and the child's cry sounded just like that. So I started walking towards that direction, and I heard the child cry to see where the child was at and to make sure they were safe. And it was just a child throwing a temper tantrum because they couldn't get a certain toy. And I told my son, we have to leave. And he goes, well, Dad, I haven't picked my model yet. And I said, no, we have to leave. And he said, it's just a kid throwing a fit, Dad. It's not a big deal. And it just triggered that video and what I had seen. And I said, we need to step out of the store. And it's something that we go through. Things can be triggered just by hearing or smelling something.
And what Anthony said is very important key for people to understand, both as the law enforcement officer, as the family member. We can be triggered by things we hear, by things we see, by things that we smell, by situations that look similar to what we witnessed in a video or read about in a case. And so as the spouse, it's kind of odd that suddenly you're doing something that seems like a normal family outing, and then your law enforcement family member then changes how they're reacting, or they suddenly become sullen and withdrawn, or they become highly agitated. It's not unusual for that to happen, but now we're giving you the opportunity to understand that. So if you experience that with your family member as a law enforcement officer or as the family member, you can then open up the dialogue and say, you know, are you responding to something that you witnessed today? Are you feeling like something was triggered in you? So start using those stories as a way to diminish the behavior reactions in yourself and your loved one. So there are some coping behavioral reactions as well. What can we do to reset? There's several things that you can do. Recall a past success. When we recall positive things in our lives, the same hormones that are produced then are produced again. So when you think back to maybe you didn't have a successful day today, you can think back to the many times you know that you saved a child, the many times that you know you made a difference in the life of a child. Think back to those successes and it will help you to reset. Write or talk about what's worrying you, so you can do this with your family member. Again, you don't have to go in graphic detail, and I think that's one of the things that I've learned through my experience working with law enforcement and with their families is that law enforcement worries that they don't want to traumatize their family, and family worries that they have no idea what's going on with their law enforcement family member. So it's okay to talk about what's worrying you. Just make sure that you do it in the same way that you would as if you were, you know, as a law enforcement officer. Think about doing it in the same way as if you were doing a press release. So use that same kind of language. Obviously, when you're doing a press release, you don't say anything that's going to traumatize people. So use that same kind of description to talk about it with your family. You want to identify one good thing that happened in the day. So think about something that maybe everything didn't go as you expected, but certainly reach for one good thing. The more often that you do that, the more that will become the habit, the more that will become the lens that you look through. And having healthy communication techniques, it's so important. If you don't feel like you've got good communication with your spouse right now, either the law enforcement or the family member, there's multiple books out there. I mean, Amazon has probably hundreds of books on communication. If you feel like you need more than just a self-help book, reach out to your EAP, your insurance, your whoever it is that provides your mental health support, and get some communication skills. There's nothing wrong with reaching out for support if it's going to help you long term. And then ground yourself. Remind yourself where you are. Remind yourself that you're okay right now. Remind yourself that you are safe and that whether or not things have gone well, you're okay right now.
So something about communication, and it's law enforcement, and again, doing this for 30 years, sometimes it's difficult for us to communicate with someone outside of law enforcement. And even as much information as I have learned throughout the years and what I've practiced here with the ICAC and then prior working with homicide, I still find myself not communicating the best that I should. A good example of that is the other day our family vehicle, actually I was told that it wasn't starting. I said, well, how long has this been? And they go, well, it's been a couple of days, but we know you're under a lot of stress right now. We could see it, so we didn't want to stress you out anymore. And again, it's something that we should communicate. I mean, I guess I could have then came in and said, well, the stress is there, but of course everything that's going on in our family outside of work is very important. So that's why it's important for us to communicate.
And we want you to understand that when we're talking today, our frame of reference right here specifically is ICAC, but this can happen to anybody, no matter what your job title is, no matter what your background is. This happens across the board. I work with not only the ICAC, but I'll work with probation and parole. I work with people that are on the street doing beat cops. Whoever it is in law enforcement can experience this, and not only law enforcement, but when we're working with our attorneys here in the office, they experience it. So when we're talking about the law enforcement officer, really what we're talking about is law enforcement and anyone directly related to traumatic stress. So if you're having to experience traumatic stress, no matter what your job title is, these things can affect you.
Yeah, actually, Carol and I recently received a request from some social workers, caseworkers that are working with individuals that have mental disabilities, and it all surfaced from a human trafficking ICAC presentation that I gave, and I asked that group, how are you taking care of yourself, and found that they're not taking care of themselves. So Carol and I are going out and meeting with them, and we're actually going to develop many of the things that we do with law enforcement, because it's important that all folks take care of themselves in all walks of life.
And I mean, this is something that a couple weeks back I was asked by our law school here to go speak to the law students, because they're trying to prepare them for the understanding that you will more than likely become traumatized. Whether this is vicariously or actually traumatized, you need to be prepared for this. So there's no one that cannot benefit from self-care. Self-care and coping mechanisms, wellness tools, this is something that no matter what your walk in life is, you can benefit from these skills. So here's another few quick things that you can try. Like I said previously, we've got some great tools, resilience tools on the website, so feel free to go to the website to print out that sheet. Wonderful resources there. Here's a few resets. So you can ground yourself by what we call the 5-4-3-2-1 process. So you want to acknowledge 5 things around you. So when you get to the point where maybe you're feeling overwhelmed, maybe you're feeling stressed out, maybe you just you're so in your brain that you're not able to think clearly, make yourself think about 5 things around you. So look around the room, see if you can see 5 things that you can point out. Acknowledge 4 things that you can touch around you. So this can be anything. It doesn't matter if you're sitting at your desk. Touch your phone, touch your coffee mug, touch your chair. 4 things that you can touch. 3 things that you can hear. Acknowledge 2 things that you can smell. Hopefully it's not a stinky onion sandwich that you had for lunch. And acknowledge 1 thing that you can taste. All of these things help to reset because they take all of our senses and make them focus on 1 thing at a time. By making us focus on our senses, it's going to bring us back. It's going to then make us grounded, and it's going to allow us to then focus on something else. Another thing that I always recommend to our law enforcement is if you're having intrusive thoughts, a quick way that sounds kind of silly, but it really works, a quick way to help with that is to read a book out loud that you're not familiar with. So, for instance, if you're not familiar with physics, and you pick up a physics book and read it out loud, that will take 100% of your focus. And when you're using 100% of your focus, there's no place for intrusive thoughts to come in. If you can do something like sing along to a song, again, that's going to take 100% of your focus. So whatever it is that you can do that takes 100% of your focus, that's going to help you to reset and then move forward.
You know, most recently, I did this exercise with my daughter, and I recommended that she was very stressed her first week of school. And I said, try reading your textbook upside down. And she did that, and she goes, you know what, Dad, I'm actually understanding what I'm reading. And I forgot why I'm so stressed. So it works.
It works. And it's amazing how it doesn't take, much time, and it doesn't take a lot of effort or energy. If you feel like you're having intrusive thoughts quite a bit, then go to the library and pick out a book that you're not used to, and then just keep it with you. So it's not something that costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of effort. It's just some quick things that you can do that will really help you increase the quality of your life. There are emotional reactions that we want you to be aware of as well. So feeling numb. I'm sure that people can understand this feeling. It's like nothing affects you anymore. So maybe you used to get joy from maybe watching a television show that you used to love to watch. Or maybe you got joy from doing an activity. Maybe you got joy from going on a hike and experiencing nature. And you realize that suddenly those things no longer have meaning to you. When you look back on your life 6 months, a year ago, and relate it back to what you're experiencing now, how have things changed? If you're experiencing things like feeling numb, becoming irritable or easily upset, having a negative view of the world, or feeling withdrawn, those are all signs that you need to pay attention to. So what we really want you to do is think back. Think back before you were doing this type of work. Think back to, a year ago, 2 years ago. How was your life then? Are there ways that your life was different, and are there things that you could do to bring yourself back? Many times by just using some stress management techniques and decreasing your overall stress, making that a habit, you will lose the numbness feeling. You will begin to feel again. It will be as if someone turned the lights on, and then you can see your world again. That's what we're hoping you'll get out of our training today. Emotionally, we can reset as well. So we'll have to adapt to the stressor. So when we're talking about adapting to the stressor, it's kind of taking a look at that and saying, okay, I acknowledge that this stresses me out, but it's what I do, and how can I let it minimally impact me? I know that the nature of my work is that I'm doing something that can be traumatizing. So what are the pieces of that I can control so that I'm not traumatized? And, you could certainly look at reframing as well. So take a look at the situation and think, I know my job is really stressful, but my job as a helper is making a difference in somebody else's life. And making a difference in somebody else's life is important to me. So by reframing the situation, that can help. Setting reasonable standards. So no matter what your job is, if you expect very much of yourself, more than you can accomplish, it's going to be too stressful. You're not going to be able to do that, and then you're going to beat yourself up over not getting things done. Try to remember to be positive in gratitude. I encourage people to write in a gratitude journal, or if you don't feel like writing in a journal, then focus on the things at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day that you have to be grateful for. Keeping a positive attitude, although it sounds kind of cliche and silly, keeping a positive attitude really does make a difference. It can actually change how you view the world, and it can actually make you see more positive than negative. And then another key thing is remember why you started doing this work. Remember why you decided that you were going to help people, why you decided to get into the area of work that you're doing. That's going to bring you back to that same inspiration, that same motivation, that same passion that you had then, and try to carry that with you so when you feel like things aren't going as well as you would like, you can remember the why.
So, and as a family, I mean, it's important we discuss this as well. So, as many of you probably discuss your decisions as a law enforcement, if I'm going to move to a new unit, I'm going to go from robbery to homicide or robbery to ICAC, there's definitely going to be some changes. So it's something that I would discuss with my spouse and talk about why I want to do that. and it's something that came up. When I took the position as a commander over 9 years ago, I had left, I'd retired from homicide, robbery, and my wife asked me, she goes, are you sure you're going to be ready for this? Because this involves children, and we had very young children at the time. And she said, and I said, yeah, this is going to be something that I want to do. I want to make a difference, and this is the reason why I want to do it. But again, thinking back about that and why you made those changes, and how has it affected your life?
The more ways that you can help decrease or reset our emotional responses is sense where the stress is in your body. And we talked briefly about this, and many people, when they were answering what causes you stress or where you're stressed, where you notice your stress, this came up. So it's important to notice where your stress is, because when you do that, that allows you the opportunity to take care of that. If I'm, again, having stress in my shoulders, then the thing I want to do is figure out how I can decrease that stress. Can I gently roll my shoulders? If I'm having stress in my legs, can I get up and walk around? The more you pay attention to what's going on with you, the more you can control things and have that sense of control and that sense of managing what's going on. When you breathe, we talked about this previously, 10 deep breaths in and out. The importance of that is not even is beyond our capability, or it's beyond our comprehension. When we're not breathing, when we're stressed and we're breathing shallowly, our brain does not get oxygen. And when our brain does not get oxygen, we are not thinking clearly, and we make rash decisions or we lash out. When we are breathing deeply, we're going to get plenty of oxygen in our brain, which is going to allow us to really feel better. Color is important. So if there's a particular color that you find soothing, then have some of that in your work area. Listening to music is important. If you find that there's music that helps you, and realistically, it doesn't matter what kind of music it is. What kind of music is relaxing to me might not be to Anthony. Find what works for you. And then sleep. The sleep deprivation is one of the biggest problems that we come across, understandably. So make that a focus. It's best if you can have some what we call sleep hygiene. So try to the best of your ability to go to sleep and get up at the same time every day. Try to go to sleep in a room that's dark. It doesn't have a television. That, your bedroom really needs to be just for sleep and sex, and that's it. You want to unplug from electronics. When we are attached to our phones, to our computers, to whatever other electronics, it does multiple things. First, the blue light is stimulating, so it's going to be stimulating our brain. It's not going to be relaxing us. Secondly, when we're constantly connected to our electronics, there's a greater likelihood that we're not connecting to people instead. So you want to take some time. I know that there's some people schedule in a time where dinner, there's no electronics, or maybe it's dinner in the evening, there's no electronics. Whatever you do that works for your family, but try to institute some no electronics time every day and see how that affects the quality of your life and your relationships. So we'd like you to take some time right now to talk about how you deal with stress. So if you could do, just like we did previously, we'll give you 2 minutes. If you could just write down what it is that you find helps your stress.
Oh, we're seeing some great responses. Exercise.
Lots of exercise. That's great.
Great. Cooking.
And praying and meditation. Those are wonderful, too. So it sounds like many of you have some really great skills that you're already using.
I like to see massage. That's great. I think it's funny how many people you ask, have you ever had a massage? And the answer is no. I did that, I actually did a survey among my law enforcement folks, and I could only, out of a group of 10, I only had 2 of them that actually ever had a massage.
I see here that somebody says dog walk. One of the things that I read at one point was that when you spend time with a dog, not only is it beneficial for you, but it's beneficial for the dog as well. So when you're petting a dog, the dog gets an increase in positive hormones. So go ahead and pet your dog as much as you possibly can. I know that Anthony has a service dog at his house and sometimes brings it into work, and the response he's gotten from his staff is overwhelmingly positive.
It is, and it's funny that she brought that up because we're looking at getting a detection dog, and my staff's excited about that. He goes, oh, we get another wellness dog. Well, it going to be a detection dog? Well, we can still pet him. It's amazing what animals do for you. They really bring down that blood pressure and helps a lot with the stress.
Right. Travel is a wonderful thing. You know, I see a couple people have written travel here. What happens is when you start to plan for vacation, 6 weeks out, you begin to get the effects of that vacation. So when you start thinking about your vacation, already those hormones are being produced, the same kind of hormones that you'll get when you're on vacation. So my recommendation to everybody is to try to plan a vacation every 6 weeks and then go on a vacation every 6 weeks. I know that's not always a possibility, but the more you can do that, the more you will constantly benefit from those positive hormones. I like that somebody wrote therapy. That's very, very important. It's something that just a place where you can vent, where you can talk about what's going on without judgment, without, there's your private one-to-one time. That's a great suggestion.
We're seeing more and more of that, especially in the law enforcement field. For years, law enforcement has always kind of kept things to themselves, lots of quiet practice, if you remember with that term, drinking, and even substance abuse. And now we're seeing more and more law enforcement across the country reaching out and speaking to someone, speaking to a therapist. It's something that's a requirement with my team throughout the state, and I'm excited to see that throughout the country as well.
And I see several posts about children and spending time with your kids and your family. Wonderful. When you have a support system and you use that support system, that's really going to help your resilience. There's many people that might have a support system but don't use it, so the more you can get out there and spend time with your family, share that meaningful time, because isn't that why we work? We go to work so then we can have the things that we want when we go home to our family. So all of you that are doing that, that's a wonderful skill.
You know, Carol, I noticed that someone put down avoid sugar, and I actually cut sugar out of my diet about 6 weeks ago, and I noticed that it's unusual that my stress level is actually down, and my headaches went away, and it seems like it really has changed the way I feel.
And that's reasonable because sugar is an inflammatory substance, and when you're feeling inflammation, that's going to make you more lethargic. It's going to give you aches and pains. It's going to make you have a less clear head. So great idea. If anybody's willing and able to avoid or at least cut back on their sugar, you're going to see some positive responses, including a better quality of sleep at night. So it's about time that we move to the next slide. Thank you for all of your answers.
Yeah, great answers.
Okay, so we talked about all of your healthy coping mechanisms. All of the ones that you spoke about are ones that we have seen. I don't know if I really have any others that I can think of that, across the country we train all the time and we see many of these same kind of healthy coping mechanisms, but I don't know if is something that, if there's some other healthy coping mechanisms that we've missed out on. I think that you have done a great job of covering those.
Yeah, Carol, that's an amazing list because we've done this training all over the country, and that was probably one of the most detailed lists that I've seen in a long time. I'm really excited to actually add that to our presentations. And I'm seeing some of your feedback here. One thing we didn't mention is scrapbooking, and that's something that my children actually took up with my wife recently, and they love that. So again, another great coping mechanism. It's not necessarily exercise unless you're counting your scissor time.
And one of the things that when we see these healthy coping mechanisms that include the whole family, that's really great. So the more that you can do to include your supports, whether that's your family, your children, your spouse, your friends, the more that you can do as a unit, whatever unit that looks like for you, the better it is. Because then you're automatically building in a support system that's going to be there for you when you need them. So here's some more resets. Very simple again. Reset your brain by the 20-20-20. And what that means is when you're doing a task, every 20 minutes, move away from what you're looking at, look at something 20 feet in the distance for 20 seconds. Amazingly enough, that's just that short amount of time can reset your brain, help you refocus, and then get you back on track. Smelling a lemon or an orange, again, this sounds kind of funny, but this is using our sense of smell. So when you smell a lemon or orange, unless, of course, you've had some negative effects, something negative happen around the lemon or an orange, that's going to brighten up That's such a tart, bright smell that it's going to make you feel better. It's going to lighten your mood. Drinking a big glass of water, can't say enough about that. When you drink water, that's going to help flush out the cortisol. It's going to help you feel better. And although it sounds kind of silly, yawning helps too. It opens up your airways. It's going to help you really refocus. It's going to reset. And then shake your right hand, then shake your left. This is going to move the cortisol out of your body. It's going to help you reset by getting some of that cortisol out and making you feel better. And you want to increase your oxytocin. Oxytocin is the feel-good hormone. So when you do that, you're going to feel better, and it's going to help decrease your feelings of stress. So give a hug or get a hug, or another thing that's even easier is think about a hug that you got. If you can think about a positive experience that you got where you gave or got a hug, again, those same hormones are going to be produced. Our brains are these amazing things that can help us without even having to leave the room, without even having to get up from our chair. They can help us reset how we feel. And smiling and laughing, wonderful as well. That's going to help when you smile. It's going to bring that oxytocin in, and laughing as well. There's a big movement right now about laughing therapy and yoga for laughing. It's amazingly productive, and it's very helpful. People are seeing some good results from that. So here are some stress interruption techniques. When we're talking about stress interruption techniques, we're talking about things that can stop, when it'll help to reset you in the middle of a situation. So when we have safe words up here, safe words are things that we recommend for both the law enforcement or the person, whatever that might be, the law enforcement, the probation, parole, whatever your role is, and as well as for your family member. So if there's a code word, Anthony and their family, they don't necessarily have a code word, but they have a code plan. So safe words are things like if you and your spouse talk about your stress level, and your spouse, you decide that there's a word that you will use if you come home from work and you're feeling really stressed out. What's that word going to be? So then you tell your spouse that you're having a brown day or something, or you're having a red day. That would mean that I need some time. And your spouse could then say to you as well, wow, it looks like you're having a red day. So there doesn't need to be a lot of dialogue that goes on. It's just one quick word to explain from spouse to spouse what's going on and what you need. The important thing here is to make sure that you do this when you're feeling calm. It's not a time to try to set these things in place when you're in the middle of a stressful situation. Anchoring is another technique, and it's one, it might take a little time for this to become a habit, but it's a really great habit to have. So any kind of thing that you use that might be a trigger for you, that's a positive trigger for you, you can use that as an anchoring technique. So if I know, for instance, that a particular song makes me feel good, I can use that as my anchor and know that whenever I listen to that song, I'm going to have a good feeling about that. So when I'm really feeling stressed out, I know my go-to song is something I can put on. Again, you could do the same thing if you know your go-to is looking at a particular picture. Some people use, they train themselves to do things like touching your thumb and middle finger together, and that's your anchor. So you think, when I touch my thumb and my finger together, I'm going to think about my wonderful vacation or the great hug that I got from my child. And so whenever you do that, it instantly brings you back to that event, and that will help anchor you. Tapping is another technique that people might have heard of. It's actually the emotional freedom technique. And it's a brain, body, and emotions reprogramming technique. So you gently tap on different parts of your body with your fingertips while you repeat a particular phrase. This, for me to explain it right now, it's pretty in-depth. So what I will say is there's some great websites out there that can teach you some quick techniques with pictures so you know exactly where to tap. But amazingly enough, it will actually help you reset, and it can calm you down, and it can help you move forward.
Last time we discussed this at one of our trainings, I actually tried this, and we found some great videos on YouTube that demonstrates tapping. So look on YouTube.
And, technology is always something that you can use. There's so many apps out there. Again, there's apps for meditation. There's apps for journaling. There's apps for just how to reset. So we encourage you to go online, actually, and see what you can find that you can keep on your phone so you can have those resets with you all the time. Some more tools and techniques. Writing a gratitude list. When you write a gratitude list, it makes you think about all the positive things that are in your life. So it's not something that's difficult. It's in the beginning it might be a little bit difficult, but if you make it a habit, then it forces you to spend your day looking for things that you can write on your list at the end of the day. Coloring is a wonderful thing that you can do. It's becoming more and more popular because people are understanding that coloring isn't just for kids. It's a very relaxing thing to do. It helps you focus. So we actually encourage at all of our trainings, if you haven't been to one, we always encourage people to do some coloring while we're talking. It helps you stay focused. It helps you relax. Journaling is another thing. There's actually online apps that you can use for journaling, or you can just journal on your computer, journal by hand. Getting your story out there every day is a way to really help you heal. Meditation and mindfulness we spoke about briefly before. So you want to do some focused breathing. Meditation doesn't have to be something very complicated. Meditation could be something simple like just sitting, listening to some quiet music, and focusing on your breath. And again, we talked previously about body scan. That's where you're going to pay attention to what you're feeling in your body to help you motivate, to help move that through you. And then technology.
Well, and some of these apps are amazing. Happify, the positive thinking, Calm. And you know, it's being in law enforcement, I actually recommended some of these apps to my folks, and they downloaded them and they're using them, and they love them. I mean, it's a great time. They're using technology instead of just catching the bad guy and being exposed to all the negative. They're using the technology on their phone to actually do something productive and help them relieve some of that stress.
So the next time you want to reach for your phone, to go on Facebook, try reaching for your phone to try a positive wellness app before you do that. So there's also things that we want you to know about as far as resources. So you can develop a safety plan. And again, our website is a wonderful place to find those resources. There's resources for safety plans there. I recommend to all families to have a family mission statement so that you as a family know what's important to you, for you as a family to know what you stand for and what's going to lead your life. When I have worked with people who have used a family mission statement, it's helped them really focus what's important to them as a family. There's plenty of websites out there that you can look at on family resources for increasing communication, for family wellness. And again, there's many, many books. If you want to go on Amazon and look at family wellness, or if you want to look at communication, if you want to look at stress management, all of those things are available to you to be delivered to your door 2 days later. So we're so glad that you were able to listen in today, and we're hoping that you've taken something away that can be helpful. We'd like to open it up right now for questions. So if you would just type your questions in, we would be more than happy to answer them. Thanks so much, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Carol and Anthony. We're going to go ahead and go to some participant questions. I know I saw one there that asked about some meditation apps specifically. If we had some names, I know we did put up the slide that had a few. I can add a couple. One is called Breathe, and one is called Calm that I use. Carol, do you have any other ones that you use?
You know, those are the two that those are kind of my go-tos because I found that those are pretty helpful. But if they don't fit for someone, if you just go into whatever your app store is and type in Calm or Breathe, it's going to bring up some other apps that you might find helpful. There's one that people like to use that I always joke about. There's one called Honest, and it's very kind of rough language, but it kind of brings a laugh to you. It talks about, you know, using meditation, but in a real life kind of a way, not a peaceful, not in a peaceful, calming way. So it's something to kind of get a kick out of. So, but there's plenty of apps that you can use that you can find from just looking in your app store.
Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and go to the participant questions now for Carol, Anthony, and Beth. Question question 1 is, what do you recommend when self-care doesn't seem to be helping anymore?
Okay, so, this came to me when I was doing a presentation about a year ago. We were talking about what happens when you're doing your job and every single thing that you've used doesn't work. And there's a couple things. If you're using all of these self-help techniques and they're not helping, my suggestion next would be then see if a therapist might help. Maybe they can give you some tools and techniques, because although we have lots and lots of general tools, not everyone fits for every person. So it could be that it's time to take a look at getting some therapy for you or your family or as a couple. That can certainly be a guide for you. That person might be able to help you figure out what the next steps are. For me, when I realized that I was using all of my self-care tools and they didn't seem to help, it came to me that it was time for me to really consider, was I happy in my job, and was it time for me to make a change? And after thinking about it for a long time and talking about it with my family, I decided that it was time for me to make a change. And when I was able to do that, I felt 1,000 times better, and my quality of life has certainly changed. So I'm not encouraging people to, run out and quit their jobs, but if nothing else is helping and you've tried all of the tools that we're talking about and you've tried therapy as well, maybe it's time to really consider if maybe a job change is the best thing for you.
Okay, the next question, and we're going to get to this a little bit in farther down too, but who are the presenters and where can I get some additional information? We do have contact information that we're going to put up here in just a second about Anthony and Carol, Beth, and myself, Elizabeth. So we're going to put those up in just a second, and we'll give you some information about that. Next question, what else can couples do to break down shutting down or stonewalling?
Okay, so as a marriage and family therapist, I see this not only in couples that are involved in law enforcement or any kind of work that's being traumatized, but I see this as a very, very common thing with all couples. What happens many times is if the communication isn't good in the beginning, then it's easier to shut down because you don't want to have a conversation because it might trigger a bigger fight. So I recommend to make sure that you are getting time together alone every single week. Your relationship should, after your own self-care, the self-care of your relationship should be the next priority. So we can't assume that we know what our spouse is thinking. We can't assume that we know our spouse loves us. We can't assume any of those things. We have to treat our relationship as important as, as we value it as we do. So I recommend having date nights. I recommend family mission statement, because then it's very clear what your priorities are as a family or as a couple. I recommend that just spending time together, realizing, having the conversation. It feels like we're beginning to shut down. How can we open our lines of communication up? I really, talk about how much you care for your spouse and how you want things to go how they, go the way they used to be. So think back. What was it that drew you to your spouse? How can you incorporate some of those initial feelings that you used to have? Really get back to the basics. Get back to what drew you together, and then try to move forward. And again, always, if you need more than just some of this information, go get some therapy. Marriage therapy can be a wonderful, wonderful tool for you to use by just having someone there listen to how you talk to each other and how the stonewalling happens, and then give you the tools and techniques to really work through that and increase the quality of your relationships. I've seen it time and time again when people come in and they list a plethora of problems in their relationship, but once the communication opens up, it changes everything and all those problems seem to dissipate.
Okay. I work alone on a shift, and it's hard to talk up to my colleagues. So what do you suggest if something hard comes up between calls?
Okay, so if something hard comes up between calls and you don't have a resource, so if you're working alone, my suggestion might be that if difficult things that come up, then you might want to write about it right then, just to get it out of your head. If it's really bad and you need someone to talk to, there's typically there's a crisis line. You know, every state has some type of crisis line, and the people on that line are trained to just listen. So don't feel like you can only call a crisis line if you're suicidal or you're homicidal. You can call a crisis line anytime that you feel like you're in crisis. And it's completely anonymous, and it gives you the opportunity to just vent to somebody who is on the other end, just to be there to listen to you. But again, if you don't feel like that's something you can do, you can write it down. If you have mental health support within your agency or at, you know, near you that you can go to, then you can certainly talk to that person about specifics that you can use right then. If you're feeling some stress there, you know, you can use some of the reset tools that we talked about. You can take 20 minutes out and look 20 feet away. You can get up and walk around the building, because that's going to help decrease your stress. You can just get up and go to the water fountain, or just, you know, stop for a minute and do some deep breathing. There's some quick tips that you can use, but if those aren't enough, certainly you can write things down to talk about it later. You can call a crisis line. You can have an appointment with your mental health provider. But any of the tools that we've talked about, I would recommend to try those first and to see if any of those will help. And then if not, then take the next steps.
And I want to touch on that as well. Just as the commander of a task force, and my state's pretty rural, you know, but being the fifth largest state, I have a lot of investigators throughout the state that work all by themselves or on little islands by themselves. So as a commander, to me, it's very important to do check-ins with them. And then I also ask some of the other jurisdictions that are close to each other, and where I know there may be only one investigator, to do check-ins as well. Because the last thing you want to feel like is being alone. So if, as a commander, I mean, if there's something that, with that question being said, you'll have my contact information. So if there's something that I can help with, you feel free to reach out to me.
Okay, great. And I know that we're also going to be sending some additional tools and tips and techniques papers out when we send out the links for this webinar. So we are going to add some additional tools for everybody to have. What suggestions do you have for how to manage the graphic images that have been seen? It's hard to unsee them. Any suggestions?
Okay, so obviously Anthony has seen images as well, and all of the people that I work with have seen really hard to see graphic images. Well, again, one of the things that we suggest is, I mean, you are absolutely right. You cannot unsee them. So how can you recognize and train yourself that when you see that image, you begin to think of something else? So we talked about the anchoring technique, and that's something that you can use in that point. So when you begin to think about seeing something that you can't unsee, you train yourself. When that thought comes up, I imagine a huge stop sign in front of me, and then I go to my anchoring technique. Or when that image comes up and I imagine a stop sign, I can use some tapping techniques. You know, once you get familiar with those things, it will be much easier to make them a practice, but it is possible to work through that. I know in the beginning it sounds like it's something I'm trying to make light of, and it's very simple that I'm talking about this in this way, but realistically, when you form a new habit, and the trigger would be having an image pop up in your head, and then you train yourself to do something else, for instance, thinking of something positive, then eventually it's going to be habit for you to think of that, see that negative image, and then you automatically go to the positive things in your life instead. It takes a while, it does take practice, but it is possible to do. And certainly, again, if you're having that image pop up in your head, just like I said previously and like Anthony talked about, pick up a book that's going to be totally away from what you're familiar with and read it out loud. All of your focus will then be on something else, which will give you a break from that image and then help you to refocus on something else. So the immediate idea is to stop that cycle. So when you think about that and that the image comes up and then probably you think about it and ruminate and you can't get it out of your head, the idea is to stop that cycle, and one of the best ways is when the image comes, imagine a big stop sign, and that's your cue to use one of your tools and techniques.
can you give some insight on how to help fellow officers or other people in the agency if they're having trouble with emotions and or if they're having a hard time with cases?
So what I would recommend is whoever it is that asked that question, have your coworker, have your peers take a look at this webinar, because once they know that you know what they're experiencing and you now have the words to talk about that, you can become a resource for them. So when they know that, when they understand that both of you are experiencing the same things, and there's times when you feel upset, when you feel like crying, certainly they will be more willing to talk with you about it, and that will give them the opportunity to open up. If we know we have a resource, it gives us a sense of hope. If we feel like we don't have anyone we can turn to because no one has experienced it, it's going to be much more difficult. One of the things that I do for our task force here in New Mexico is I go around and I visit with all of our ICAC affiliates. And I heard many people talk about having these experiences and keeping them to themselves when I was talking with them individually. And then I started meeting with groups of people, and they recognized that each of them were experiencing the same thing. And once they knew that, they all felt more comfortable talking about it to each other. So there are law enforcement now that are willing, when they're having a really rough day, to go to one of their coworkers and say, you know, I'm having a really rough time with this particular case. And their coworker can genuinely say, I understand what you're going through. Just having that resource and having somebody be willing to listen to you is going to make a huge difference. Again, you don't have to go into detail about what specifically it is that bothered you, but just talk about the nature of the material is really getting to me today, and I'm feeling overwhelmed, or I'm feeling really sad, or I'm feeling like there's no humanity left. Having that conversation with your coworker is going to give them the support. And also, you know, there's the tools and techniques on the website. There's this webinar. There's probably resources that you have through your EAP or through your insurance. Do what you can to support your partner, and recognize that that will probably help you get support as well.
Okay, we have a question about do we have a resource list of reputable counseling professionals or agencies to call in each state? And I'm going to go ahead and answer that just a little bit. We do have resources on our website. We have a map that has some certain individuals on there that we have had contact with through other agencies, and some that work with us specifically, that we are always willing, and they are always willing to answer questions. We are working on that map, so that will be bigger soon. That's something that we're working on. And I think we're almost done here. We have about 5 minutes. I want to ask maybe one last question, and that is, as people are learning these new techniques, how long should they try them before they see a difference and or go to something else?
Well, it depends on the technique. I mean, if it's something that's just something like breathing, you know, doing some breathing, you have to do it several times. It's not something that takes just once. We're asking people to make a change in their behavior. So just like with any change, just like with creating a new habit, it can take weeks for it to become a go-to for you. So what you want to do is you want to see how, if it feels good, if it feels like it's something that might be possibly something helpful, and then you want to reinforce it by doing it again and again. And if you try it for a couple of weeks and you're not getting any help from it, then maybe try one of the other tools and techniques. There's so many of them that one of them should help you, should be a good fit for you. When you're thinking about building a new habit, whatever that might be, figure that these are going to take as long as however it has taken you to build a new habit. So if you used to smoke and you stopped smoking, think about how long it took you to do that, and then give the new habit of the new healthy habit the same amount of time.
Okay, great, thanks. And I just want to reemphasize that you can go to our website, shiftwellness.org, for any follow-up. I'm happy to take any questions on my email, elizabeth@innocentjustice.org, as is Beth, Anthony, and Carol. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Adam at this time for closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth and Beth, and both of our presenters, Anthony and Carol, for such a great presentation and for sharing such great information with our participants. We do want to remind everyone that we will be following up with an email with the resources as well as the video file that unfortunately did not play correctly. And we also want to remind you that the webinar will be archived on OJJDP's online university at ojjdpou.org. In addition, you can feel free to reach out to OJJDP's NTTAC or the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And again, we want to thank everyone for joining us today and hope everyone has a great rest of the day. Thank you again.